I want to pick up on your broader point, Stephen, about how it's not just traditional financial products, but there's potential here to go much further. And I was thinking, the last 20 years, or so the period after the Soviet Union collapsed and more countries moved into the market system, the first thing that used to symbolize that transition would be they would open a building with a stock exchange on, and I guess Euronext is partly the process of closing down many of those physical exchanges or turning them into integrated systems and so forth. But I mean, as you think about how markets should be developing now in places like Africa, I mean, what really now are the challenges to build the kind of broader online connected marketplaces that we really need?
Well, so you're right about exchanges. Exchanges, as we found in all of our merger and acquisition and conversations with other exchanges in the world, it's still a source of great national pride. Everyone is very proud of their ability to raise capital in a variety of ways. And we have a model in the US, and I'm not trying to say but the US is better than any other area of the world. We just did it sooner, and so that makes us a little bit more experienced. And then we have a very interconnected national market system in the US, which we don't have yet in Europe and in Asia, but it will come, and in the other continents as well. And I think that the ability of us as technologists to be able to link those all together, one can still maintain their national identity in an exchange, but when I think, to use maybe an overused concept, if I think of a cloud, there is no reason in my mind that an investor, whether retail, institutional, whatever he or she may be, who's sitting in any part of the world that wants to mix and match a number of financial instruments or other things, that they should have to work hard to do that. They should be able to submit an order to one facility that might look like the global exchange cloud, and then that cloud has enough intelligence to send those orders to the right place, get the best possible execution quality on them at the best price and all the other good things that people need, bring them back, and that kind of efficiency should help both, of course, developed nations and third world countries be more a part of the world stage, especially on the financial front.
Now, does your company actually have any particular sort of corporate citizenship activities that's about building market systems, improving access to capital in countries where that doesn't work well at the moment?
I don't think from a corporate citizenship per se, but however, and I don't want to be crass, but the commercial arm, we entertain and look for all good venues to sell our products and services, and that takes us to all the corners of the world to do so.
Because I mean, Africa has some of the booming stock exchanges of the world at the moment, and did you want to go in there?
I'm sure we've had conversations with more than one African country. And then the other interesting thing about Africa, when one of the problems that we try and solve in this global marketplace problem is that people want to be, in thinking globally, they want to position themselves from a physical distance perspective, equidistant from the major places in the world. And a recent study, this is in the last maybe 6 months, has said that Africa would be an ideal geocentric place to locate a facility with which to reach out to Asia and the United States and Europe. So if people follow up on that advice, you never know, Africa could be a booming place for financial institutions.
So let's take a couple of questions from the audience. Who would like to kick us off? Someone must have a bright idea this late in the day. Gentleman here.
Hi, my name is Rashid Desai, and the question I have is about retail. You mentioned retail. Have you done any piloting in the retail marketplace for an exchange besides financial instruments?
We have not. We have certainly talked about it, and I can show you really good proposals that we have internally should we decide that that's a direction to go in. From a technology perspective, we know that the technology will support a lot of different kinds of marketplaces. It's just a question of deciding that that's the direction for us to go in and it's the right time. Obviously, we would prefer to pursue things that have the potential of big volume, because in our game, it's a volume game as opposed to a few transactions that are very rich. You can't depend on those. And so we're to use maybe one cliche, we're sticking to our knitting right now. But we reserve the right, or at least I as a technologist reserve the right to apply wherever we might come up with a good idea.
Now, I remember a few years ago when Dick Grasso ran the New York Stock Exchange, and interviewing him, and he was saying, well, you know, really, everyone thinks of us as a building, a trading floor, but really we're a data company, and fundamentally we should have been Bloomberg, but we took our eye off the ball and we lost that whole marketplace. And you mentioned earlier when we were talking about how beyond financial products, there's all these other markets, and you referred to eBay when we were talking, that maybe, and I'm wondering whether the New York Stock Exchange should have been eBay, but also I look around the web and some of them, as I've been writing my philanthrocapitalism stuff, and one of the organizations that intrigues me is Kiva, which has gone from nowhere to raising 150 million, 200 million in direct peer-to-peer lending between people who want to support people in the rich world and people who want to support small business people in the developing world. And, you know, I wonder whether, again, you're going to be blindsided by new organizations that will come in and actually address these opportunities much more directly than it sounds like you're doing.
So it's certainly a problem worth contemplating. Now, we tend to focus on the premium end of the technology environment. So for instance, what characterizes the things that we do? Millions of transactions a second, execution time in the microsecond range. And if I were on eBay selling Pez dispensers, if it takes a few more microseconds, I don't really care. So maybe our technology is over-engineered, and maybe too high a cost comes with that. Having said that, we would be, I think, remiss if we didn't pursue things like that, see how big they could become if we catalyze them with our technology, again, removing all the friction that we can from a global marketplace, and see and project where it might go. So I would hope that we would have conversations like that in the future about such things, so that we don't miss opportunities.
And Shelley, I mean, do you see similar challenges from Kiva? I mean, are you actually going to see a sort of private sector online approach to development that will just actually become, you know, in a very good way, the driver of development policy and activism rather than big old institutions?
So it's interesting. I think there's a role for all the different kinds of approaches. If you look at, say, one of the roles the World Bank can play, for example, we look at, among other things, the policy and regulatory ecosystems and frameworks that governments can create to help industry grow. So you need that level, as well as growth from the ground and innovation on the ground. And in an ideal world, you bring all of that together and you have the greatest impact and greatest growth. So the bank is an interesting place, and I must admit, I didn't know that much about it until I joined, but not only do we work with governments, but we also do tremendous work with private sector. And one of the things that we do is try and ensure that we have the right public-private partnerships involved and the right environment to build businesses, to encourage growth, to make things happen, and to provide these ecosystems so that, frankly, government is doing what government does best, private sector is doing what private sector does best, and private citizens have an opportunity to operate in the ways that they can contribute best.
You know, I was just thinking, I mean, global giving is one of those examples
Right.
I always think of as a sort of classic example of an innovation that happened within an organization, the World Bank, this online money-raising site, and culturally the World Bank couldn't handle it, I think, and so it spun off outside. Do you feel now you've got someone like yourself there that you'd be much more able to use that and grow it within a World Bank framework?
You know, I think it's a learning process. I think we're learning how. I think more than ever before, we are cooperating with the civil society organizations, with other nonprofits, with the rest of the NGO community. I think there's a whole ecosystem, and we're learning to work together for the benefit of all. But frankly, it is a learning process, and it takes time. And the technology helps. The ability to communicate helps. The ability to collaborate helps. It all makes a difference. But these are changing roles in pretty dramatic ways.
So we have one last question there. Can you say who you are, please?
Yes, good afternoon, Jason McKay. I always get calls every week about cloud computing and externally hosted solutions. And from a financial industry perspective, how do you feel about externally hosting your data in other places outside your control?
So I'll start. So I would be remiss if I didn't mention the privacy and security issues that have to be dealt with. We're kind of an interesting animal in that we have diplomatic immunities. So the land we're on in Washington is non-governmental land. Although I work in Washington, I don't work in Washington. So it's kind of an interesting question. But I can tell you we are and will be embracing cloud solutions. You have to be careful of the contracts, you have to be careful of the terms, but there's no question that we'll be embracing it because the promise, if you will, of speed, flexibility, capacity, all of those great things, simplicity potentially, all of those great things is just too much to ignore. So we will be embracing it, but there are a lot of considerations along the way.
Well, and we obviously believe in cloud technology, which is why we are selling it to our customers. And because we couldn't go to Amazon because of security and reliability. When you've got an enterprise through which trillions of dollars flow, you don't want to pioneer too much and take a chance with those kinds of things. And the financial services community, especially capital markets, has echoed that back to us saying, this private cloud thing that meets the standards of the New York Stock Exchange, we would like to play in that. We would like to give stuff to you that we wouldn't give to a run-of-the-mill vendor. So it's a very important thing. But I also like to point out, not to burst the bubble on the cloud stuff, but I like to remind people sometimes that the cloud computing concept is not a new concept. The first cloud computing company, commercial service that I can remember, or at least remember reading about, was 1964, except it didn't have a really cool name like cloud. It had a very archaic name that people didn't like timesharing. And sometimes when I say timesharing to younger crowds, they say, timesharing, what does that have to do with fractional interest in a condo in Miami? I don't understand what the relationship is. And so it's a 50-year-old concept that yes, the economics are different, the technology is different, but we kind of have experience in this world about these things, and people know how to use them and when to move forward and when to be a little bit conservative.
Well, unfortunately, our time is up. So, Stephen and Shelley, thank you very much for staying.
Thank you very much.